I wanted to come on here and talk about this story that's been it's slowly trickling around, but it's not getting a lot of the media attention that it should, considering the city and state that it came out of. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. So in this picture, you see a teenager by the name of Elias Valdez. And last year, he was stabbed to death over a marijuana deal gone wrong in Chicago. Follow me here, because you know mainstream media loves to talk about Chicago, but they're being very quiet when it comes to this. And there's a reason as to why. That's because Elias Valdez is not the typical look, quote unquote, of Chicago when it comes to mainstream media wanting to bring up crime stats in Chicago. But the thing about this situation is the person who stabbed him to death only got probation. So this happened last year in 2020, only to come back over a year later, and the person who stabbed him only got probation. And the person who stabbed him is only 17, 2 years older than him. And not only that, but they have unidentified the teenager, meaning we know how old this teenager is. We know what they did. We know the motive behind it, but they did not release an image or their name. I had to actually go and Google to make sure that this wasn't the person who did it, just to make sure that I had my story correct before I started to talk about it. But this right here is the victim. This is the one who was killed. So I'm going to go ahead and read this article. A Chicago teenager who pled guilty to murdering a 15-year-old boy in a bad drug deal was given a wrist slap sentence of 3 years probation. The 17-year-old defendant, who hasn't been publicly named, was sentenced on Monday in the fatal stabbing of Elias Valdez in the suburb of Glenview in August 2020. He was given probation, 100 hours of community service in order to undergo counseling in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Police said the stabbing unfolded after Valdez, who was a member of his high school wrestling team, tried to buy marijuana from the defendant. Valdez was stabbed repeatedly in the chest with a utility tool after he tried to take the drugs without paying and got into a fight with the defendant. He was pronounced dead in the hospital later that day. In handing down his sentence, Cook County Judge Stephen Bernstein told the defendant, "I see a child like you who has two parents concerned with his welfare. A bright kid with a future, and I wonder, what are you doing in my courtroom?" See, they already started with the bright kid and a bright future. You come from a two-parent household. Why are you here? So basically, if this was a kid that had one parent and possibly black, because they don't specify who the teenager is who did it, then they would have probably been like, oh, just business as usual, lock him up. See how they took sympathy with this person after he killed someone? And it almost makes it seem like the judge is almost saying like it's Elias Valdez's fault why the defendant is in the courtroom today, basically saying if he didn't try to take the weed without paying, then we wouldn't be having this discussion today. Basically, in a subliminal way, for me, if that's the conclusion that I'm drawing, it's almost like he's doing the victim blaming part. But I'm gonna touch on that at the end. I don't think you're a murderer. He killed someone, and it wasn't even in self-defense. It's because they ran off without paying. Thus, he killed him. Like, he wasn't defending himself or property. But you killed this child, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life. The victim's family had wanted the defendant to be charged with first-degree murder. They held protests outside the local police department late last year when he was charged with the lesser count. I'm going to be honest, I don't think they would have been able to find him guilty of first-degree murder, even if he could have been found guilty of anything, considering what the defendant only got, mainly because they would have had to say that this was premeditated. And this weed man, whoever it was, I'm sure probably didn't plan to go and kill him. It just happened. So I can see why they went with second degree, because it wasn't a planned execution. He didn't go out there and plan to kill him. For all we know, he's probably bought weed off of this person before. It's just that this time it just went left. Valdez's mother, Marcela Fierros, delivered a victim impact statement at the defendant's sentencing, saying she doesn't believe justice was served with probation. When the defendant stabbed my son, he stabbed the heart of my family. A mother doesn't expect to bury a child so young, and much less in a tragic and overwhelming way. He was only 15 years old and had so many dreams to accomplish. His goals were to graduate from high school, study law enforcement, and become a police officer. Defense attorney David Kirstein denied that his client had received special treatment. There is no privilege here, he said. It takes two to make a drug deal. Mr. Valdez was a buyer. Now, like I said, this thing could swing both ways, so I'm going to remain neutral because I have to call it out on both sides. Was this a slap on the wrist? Hell yes. Hell yeah, without the shadow of a doubt. Because at the end of the day, the 17-year-old murdered him. He took him out. He killed him. It was not self-defense. Going for that first degree, that wasn't going to happen. Second degree was their best bet because it wasn't like he planned to execute him. It just happened because he ran off and without paying. He ran off, and tried to get a freebie. So at that moment, and that's the thing, when you buying like drugs of any kind, whether it's weed or anything else, you better pay your people because they know your face. And people who deal drugs, they gonna do what they can do to get their money because they got to pay their money to another person and also have their cut at the same time. Because, it's bigger than just the person you're buying your stuff off of. Well, if it's weed, it's probably just you. But if it's like a bigger drug, it's probably something else. But at the end of the day, he did murder this boy. Now, on the flip side of things, Elias Valdez was buying from him. He knew he had to pay. He should have known that if he didn't have the money to buy weed that day, then just come back when you have the money and pay then. He must have really needed a high and couldn't help himself. And he probably knew the risk of running off without paying, but he decided to do it anyway. He probably said, oh, you know what? I'm going to just take from this person and run off and they're not going to catch me or anything like that. You cannot think like that. And he probably, who knows what was going through his head when he decided to do that. You never, ever do that. Or your best bet, go and buy your own weed or have someone buy some weed for you and you roll up your own shit. Someone that you can trust. Or go smoke with other people for free. So like I said, I see it from both ends. Like I said, the first end, that was a slap on the wrist with the probation for sure. The judge was very lenient. And on this side, he should have known better to not run off with the money or with no money. Like I said, if you don't have the money to buy weed, then you just ain't getting high that day. Just come back when you have the funds. Now, the grand scheme of things of this whole situation is, yes, this happened in Chicago. Why isn't mainstream media talking about it? I had to find this out on the internet, like from other people who have done videos or commentaries about it. And it's a very small window of people who have talked about it. See, the story is not floating around out there. Had Elias Valdez been a black teenager in the same situation, it would have probably went through the roof and they probably would have labeled it black on black crime. We might have even known who the defendant is who killed him. Like I said, in this case, we only know that the defendant is 17 and that he got probation. And that's it. And this happened last year in August. Granted, there was a lot of stuff going on in August because that was back around the time of Jacob Blake, depending on when in August it actually happened, because it doesn't have a date. It just has the month and the year. But like I said, mainstream media love to talk all this ish about Chicago. Chicago this, Chicago that. But they were definitely quiet about this one. And like I said, I truly believe it's because of who the victim is and whoever the person who made this person into a victim. And the fact that the judge was very lenient on the defendant lets me know right off the bat that that defendant was definitely not black. Like, they pulled out all the stops. Bright future, 2-parent household, and you're in my courtroom, basically saying, like, you come from a good family and everything, like a good solid background. Why are you here? We got to look out for your future. So we're going to give you this probation. So, like I said, I can just tell off of the judge's remarks that this defendant, the 17-year-old who did this, is definitely not a black teen. I can write that off. If it came out that it was, I would be pleasantly surprised. But that's pretty much my take on this story right here. I'm curious to see, or rather should I say, hear what you have to say down in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with my assessments? Do you believe that mainstream media would have talked about this more had the victim been a black teen? Because I truly believe they would have talked about it, but they would have talked about it from the standpoint of black on black crime, because that's how they like to be. But since it wasn't here, or it wasn't present here, they didn't have a story to run with. That's why I call them mainstream media. That is one of the major reasons why I call them that. One of several.